Yes, yes. Okay. Good evening. Yes, now we are nearly complete. Welcome to the panel talk, which has been organized by our new center called SPIL. You've got the flyer telling something about it. And the topic is exactly as the SPIL is sustainable process integration, simultaneous minimization of resources, intake, and emissions. And if you want to know a little bit more about the SPIL, you can read it here. If you are still not good enough in Chinese, we've got also English version. This is a new project funded by the European Union via the Czech Ministry of Science and many other things as usual. And the topic is to contribute to same targets as is SDEWES. So it's a very lucky and happy coincidence, and we are lucky to discuss it. So, introduction. Alarming levels of greenhouse gases. I would like to stress, and you will see on the other slide, we are stressing it again and again, it's not only CO2. Even some well-known journals got it not correct, dealing just with CO2. But if you noticed, the previous US President Obama and Chairman Xi signed agreement. Unfortunately, we don't know what is happening now with the present president, but signed the agreement about greenhouse gases, not only CO2. Research and development focus on minimizing greenhouse gases, nitrogen, energy, and water footprint. Those are our main topic. What we can do for it. Energy saving, improving efficiency of fossil fuel installations. Neven doesn't like it too much, but actually his most cited paper is about clean coal. I've been a little bit surprised, but it is the case. And well done. But why we should also deal with fossil fuels? If we can't beat them immediately, we can do our best to minimize the damage. And if we like it or not, fossil fuel will be around still some time. And if we don't do proper research, the damage will be much higher. Sustainability. Sustainability has got many features. We are mostly technologists, but it has got very important societal and economical features. What is an example? We as technologists are able to make, not exactly me, but colleagues who are, say, dealing with the car industry, are able to design cars which got consumption about 3 liters per 100 kilometers. But if you go to some big countries and big cities, you will see mainly 4-wheel drives consuming 5 and more than 5 times more. So, societal part is very important because people should be ready to use environmentally friendly solutions. And, okay, there should be models, all the tools which are needed. Now this is, I will, in my introduction, use my 2 most favorite slides. This is total annual greenhouse gas emissions. What is important here, look on CO2, which is mentioned many, many times. It's less than 2/3 of greenhouse gases. And we've got some other parts. And the red part is actually CO2 from forestry and other land use. Believe or not, green, which is used for environmentally friendly, the forests are actually releasing more CO2 than they are capturing, at least Europeans. I started now to read forestry journals, agriculture journals, and I was a little bit horrified because everything depends on the right management of forests. Forests shouldn't be, as they are in many countries, just a factory for producing wood and biomass, but should be something which is contributing to making less greenhouse gases. And, of course, the blue one, methane. Well, methane, nearly 21-fold stronger greenhouse gas than CO2. And how many? We've got papers about methane. We need to push it, because methane is a result of industrial processes, but also anaerobic digestion, rotting, and marshlands are producing a lot of methane. And finally, we've got nitrogen and oxys, which are not only greenhouse gases, but also very dangerous. The next slide is what I would like to turn your attention to. This is US balance economy-wide losses on the energy. On the left-hand side, you've got input, coal. 50%, more than 50% coal. As I said, we don't like it, but no researcher or scientist can do too much of it. We can minimize it. Renewables. Renewables are on the right hand down a little bit. It will grow. But look on this red, conversion and transmission losses. 2/3, nearly 64%. And 64% is very substantial part. And again, we've got much more attention to renewables than reducing the losses. Why? Well, renewables are much better business. But if we would like to do something for this planet, we need to look on this red. And many people are starting to understand it. Fine. I talked too long now, so let me to introduce the topics. Those are topics of this talk, and those are panelists. I am very happy we've got Italy, we've got Croatia, Slovenia, UK, New Zealand, and the Czech Republic. You can see a typical Czech face. She is from Asia, so we've got every part of the world represented. The first talk is from Professor Vincenzo Dovi. You can see the summary of his talk. I'm not going to repeat it because I assume that most of the audience can read, and probably much faster than me talking. The second panelist is Professor Neven Dujic from Zagreb, from Croatia, and this is the title of his talk. The third one is Zdravko Kravanja from Maribor, Slovenia. And again, you can see what he will talk about. Next one is, we just practiced to pronounce her first name, Yifi Foley, from UK, but Belfast, Ireland, and she is nicely dressed in Irish national colors, not in blue, white, and red. And again, this is the summary of her talk. Now comes New Zealand, Michael Walmsley from the University of Waikato, which is a very nice place, very nice university. It has got only one problem. To fly there from Europe is a very, very long way. On the other hand, when he's coming, he has to fly the same way. So I highly appreciate him to come to join us. And The last but definitely not least is Ivan Fan. She will do something what I would expect more from people from Zagreb, but because they haven't touched it so far, and we found some little bit striking issues about emissions from ships. And actually the idea started when we got SDEWES conference on the ship. That time we wanted to compare environmental impact going by ship or by car, so now it has been a little bit extended. And at the end of my introduction, I would like to invite you for next year press conference. After Tianjin this year, we are coming as traditionally to the Prague. For people from Asia, you can use it also for wedding photographs, which are becoming very, very popular. You can pick up which one you would like, but also it's good to come for the conference. And finally, this is the acknowledgement of our project, and I am very happy to acknowledge all those universities which are collaborating with us, and the collaboration is a real joint research which materializes in the joint publication. So this is my introduction, and I am very happy to invite the first speaker, which is Professor Vincenzo Dovi.
Well, first of all, many thanks for inviting me to take part in this panel here in the SDEWES conference in beautiful Dubrovnik. I will not consider the so much process optimization in itself, but rather the framework in which the optimization is actually to be carried out. So, in a sense, I'll be the devil's advocate of the panel. And so, as a devil's advocate, don't be surprised if I'll make some heretical sentences and questions trying to come to orthodox answers. Well, actually, my first engagement with process optimization, with resource intake minimization, emission minimization, was when I started my working life, and that, unfortunately, is back in the 70s of last century. And exactly in 1975, this is considered a momentous years for Western Europeans, because it's the last year of what the French call les 30 glorieuses. That is the 30 glorious years from the end of the Second World War to exactly 1975. It was a period when people expected year by year to have more goods, to have better goods, to have cheaper goods. And so in the old good times, in the good old years, the recipe for optimization was rather straightforward. And as a young engineer, I received just very precise guidelines, very simple but very precise guidelines by my chief at the time in the largest Italian company at the time, which is no longer existent. And the recipe was, well, we must produce with $1 what the others produce with $2. So, and I tried to apply this to the bids that we made to the polypropylene plants at the time, with the only competitor which was not based in China or India, but in Great Britain was ICI. But then just to mention the events that took place in my country, came the Seveso disaster, the red muds in the Tyrrhenian Sea, and with these events came angry citizens, shrewd politicians, and what we now refer to as NIMBYism, that is, not in my back courtyard. And the process industry complied with this request by solving the local problem, that is, diluting the toxic substances into a wider environment, which implied higher chimneys, diluting with fresh water, diluting wastewaters with fresh waters, discharging in larger river basins or in coastal areas. But, well, if every one of us takes a handful of sand in the Sahara Desert, after a while there is no sand left, or the sand becomes scarce. So the solution of local problems favor the onset of global problems. So the 80s, the last years of the 70s and the 80s were the years of the depletion of ozone layers, acid rains, eutrophication of coastal waters. We still remember the Adriatic Sea turning red. I mean, the seawater looked like blood, actually. And of course, global warming. So the new watchword became sustainability, as Professor Clemens has remembered. And at industrial level, the problem was to comply with the reduction of resource intake and emissions. Now, let me ask the first heretical question. Why optimize? Why should we optimize at all? And, well, the answer seems obvious. Mankind is in overshoot. And this is not a case for doomsday scientists. It's the result of rational, critical analysis. So one might think that reducing the impact of industrial processes, minimizing emissions, resource intake is good for the environment, spares the environment, and of course reduces the overall anthropogenic impact. Or does it? Well, the impact is not reduced if more and more people require more and more goods, cheaper and cheaper goods, more and more abundant goods, even if the goods are produced in a more and more efficient way. I mean, there are different and contrasting dynamics at work, and it is, well, an act of overconfidence to take it for granted, as we sometimes do, that the rate of technology improvement will offset the dramatic rates of other phenomena, such as population growth or extravagant consumerism. Well, one might think, well, in any case, we shall alleviate these problems if we improve technology. Well, do we really? I mean, I wonder, do we really? And, well, technology improvement is frequently deferred, postponed the onset of dramatic changes. From the time, I mean, it's was discovered over 200 years ago by Thomas Malthus, that industrial revolution and what is called guns and steel resolve the overpopulation problem in Britain. But deferring, postponing a problem does not solve problems. And as control engineers know very well, delays in complex systems, and we live in a complex system with many interactions and many feedback interactions, can be a serious source for instability. So we have a case in point. The Green Revolution in agriculture. The new technology reduced famines, hunger for one generation, but it favored the explosion of population growth, which is not offset by the gains offered by the technology. So I'm not pledging for reducing the efforts in improving the technology, but what I'm pledging for is the necessity of what Dennis Meadows and Jürgen Randers in their update to the limits of growth define as the necessity of networking. I mean, technology alone will not do it. So this is the first non-heretical answer to the heretical question. I have enough. The second heretical question is, how much do we have to optimize? Well, the obvious answer is as much as possible. I wonder, well, if we suppose that cap and trading is the most efficient way for the control of pollution on a global scale, worldwide, and taking it for granted that trading, pollution emission trading works fairly well on a global scale, the problem is to define the cap, because the cap defines the constraints on industrial production. These constraints are based on models and data. Data are sparse. Data are inaccurate. Data are potentially ambiguous. And big data will not solve the problem. Environmental models are based on sometimes dubious assumptions, for instance, linearity, which is nature is not linear, contains what are called known unknowns, because it contains parameters that we are not able to define with great accuracy, and what is even more important, contain unknown unknowns. That is, we omit variables in the models. And this is a very, very serious problem. And of course, if the models are only roughly known or inaccurate, because based on inaccurate data, on unreliable assumptions, then we take a chance of underperforming, that is, to not complying with the constraints, with the cap, or to over-optimize. Well, one might wonder what's wrong with over-optimization. But over-optimization does not imply just additional costs. It implies a rigidity which might be at odds with the resiliency of the system. I had the chance to witness this difficulty in the 80s when the Italian chemical industry had to undergo a change of paradigm, as all other industries in Europe. But because they had difficulties, I mean, the optimization had been tuned to the particular structure of the Italian industry, they simply, there were many other problems, inadequate management, interference from politics and so on. But one of the problems was extreme rigidity. I would like, don't worry, it's just a few sentences, but I would like to read a couple of them because they are illuminating. They are simple, clear, and honest, I think. They are contained in a report to the House of Representatives of the United States of America by a scientist, Judith Curry, that maybe some of you are familiar with her works. I'll just read a couple of them. I mean, efforts to link dangerous impacts of extreme weather events to human-caused warming are misleading and unsupported by evidence. The articulation of a preferred policy option by the United Nations has marginalized research on broader issues. Pragmatic solutions have been proposed based on efforts to accelerate energy innovation, build resilience to extreme weather, and pursue no regrets pollution reduction. I emphasize this because I'll say a few more words later on. And we must avoid the hubris, the overconfidence of pretending to know what will happen with the 21st century climate. So, I'll say a few more words on no regrets pollution because I think this is the key to the approach of the problem. But let me state the last heretical question: how should we optimize? And in this case, we have a textbook answer. Just maximize the net present value of the project subject to the environmental and societal constraints. But in this case, both cash flows and discount factors are subject to uncertainty, which is an uncertainty which adds to the modeling uncertainty. But it's more than that, because we generally use, we don't know the type of uncertainty. We frequently use Gaussian normal distributions or more exotic distributions based on extreme events probability. But sometimes, such as the Fréchet distribution, Weibull distribution, and so on. But both are of limited use. Can we predict the probability of a presidential tweet or of a terrorist attack here in beautiful Dubrovnik? No, probably we cannot. There is no probability distribution. So these are called black swans. And black swans is what makes of the most efficient cost-benefit analysis a blunt tool. I mean, in most cases, not usable. What's the way out that we generally use? Well, we propose scenarios, and we leave it to the decision makers to select a scenario. I believe this is dangerous. This is a real danger, a serious danger, and a real danger. Because there is the strong possibility of the so-called cherry picking. And every decision maker picks the cherry that most suits his political convenience. So we all know that the right wing denies global warming, and the left wing denies the consequences of overpopulation or immigration and so on. They have become trademarks, brand marks. And there is another problem that I think we should really think about very seriously, and it is what, again, Judith Curry calls the tribal nature of the scientific community. That is, the emergence of groups with different opposing opinion, in which the so-called group thinking stifles any rational and critical discussions. And the opinions held by opposing groups are not different opinions. They become a kind of devious fallacies. Well, so I think, just to sum it up and all to give an overall answer to the heretical question, is that we must, as scientific community, we must try to attain a shared consensus, just as in politics is the achievement of a shared consensus. And this shared consensus, in my opinion, should be based on what was suggested by Dennis Meadows, on networking, one side, on the other side, on the no regrets policy. It is a consensus. Not everybody must have the same ideas, but must be ready to accept a broad consensus in a certain area. This will enable us as scientific community to present to policymakers, but also to the public opinion, clear options, because the public opinion tends to regard scientists and experts either as fraudsters or as fools, just because we are not able to attain this consensus. So the way out of these problems, in my opinion, to gain the confidence of the public opinion and to be able to have a different role with respect to the decision maker is to reach a consensus and to develop a networking activity in all the different scientific communities.
Okay, thank you very much. And I will ask Professor Neven-Dujic for his introduction.
Okay, thank you, Jiří, for inviting me to this panel. I fully agree with you that energy efficiency is a critical issue. And if we look at this graph, we can see that there is enough waste heat or excess heat in Europe that we can cover all the needs for heating in Europe. That would be energy efficiency. We would not be destroying energy by using gas at homes, burning gas at high temperature to produce low temperature heat. We would be using waste heat from power plants, for example. This would be a very easy solution to do. Of course, you cannot bring all this waste heat to homes, but Heat Roadmap Europe has shown that more than 50% of heating can be done using waste heat. Another interesting example, we did the energy plan of Cape Verde in 2002, and then we advised the government to go wind, because it was already cheaper than fossil fuels at that time. They're now at 20% wind, but it's difficult to integrate more than 20–30% into island energy system because it's a variable energy source. But if you integrate it with water system and they have to desalinate all of their water because it's a desert, then you can actually get to 88% of renewables in your power energy system, and the water can be 76% renewable. A very simple integration of two different systems. But usually water people don't like to talk with energy people, electricity people. They're just buying electricity and producing water as if it doesn't really matter where this electricity is coming from. But the prices are changing now very quickly. If you look at the blue dots, those are the levelized cost of electricity in 2012. Already wind was the cheapest electricity and solar was getting very cheap. But if you look at the red stars, those are the last tenders of technologies. Solar, last week, tender in Saudi Arabia was 15 euros per megawatt hour, 1.2 cents per kilowatt hour. That's really cheap. But there is problem with wind and solar, which we have to try to solve somehow, and integration is the way to do it. 20th century energy systems were built so that supply was following demand, because we could control the fossil fuel supply of electricity. But 21st century, we have to change that because our supply is not anymore controllable, it's variable. It depends on wind and insulation. So we need to make such systems which will follow, where demand will follow supply. And in order to do that, we need to get a lot of flexible demand. How shall we do that? If we look at this graph, the red line shows the electricity price in 1 week in Germany. And half of the time, the price is under 20 euros per megawatt hour, 2 cents. That means that electricity is cheaper than biomass, much cheaper than gas, much cheaper than anything else on the thermal value. So we can use this electricity and this price signal in order to satisfy our energy needs. Let's look one way how we can do it. Power to heat. This is a small district heating in Denmark. When the electricity price, pale green line, is expensive, then cogeneration units are producing heat and electricity and selling it in the market. When electricity is cheap, then electric boilers are converting free or very cheap electricity into heating and satisfying our heating need. This is the orange colors, are electrical boilers. Another big new field, apart from heating, that we can electrify is transport. Last year, 1% of the world market of cars were electric cars, and the market is growing 60% per year. If we electrify cars, that is 80% reduction of energy use, because electricity is much more efficient. That is also one thing which is good about renewables, Jiří. If we replace fossil fuels with renewables, it's not only that 1 unit of coal is replaced by 1 unit of renewables, it is also that 1 unit of renewables is replacing 2 units of losses. So by investing in renewables, we are solving the problem of losses much more efficiently than investing in energy efficiency. But coming back to the electric cars, which are much more efficient, the problem is charging. If everybody comes home, for example in Austria, and plugs into fast charger that they have at home, for example, at 5 o'clock afternoon after they come back from work. That would mean that the system would need to supply 20 times the installed capacity of electricity. This is not feasible. So we need smart charging. We need that cars are charged based on the price of electricity on the wholesale market. This is not too difficult to do because cars are parked 95% of time. So they can charge when there is wind and solar and not charge the rest of the time. I'm stealing this graph from Henrik Lund because it shows very nicely how we can actually increase the penetration of renewables. This is the black graph shows what is the percentage of curtailed wind if we increase the penetration of wind in the energy system. And you can economically accept the loss of 5% of wind. It means you can integrate up to 20% of wind energy into your energy system. But if you integrate it with heating system, district heating system, then you can go to 40%. If you integrate it also with transport system, you can go to 80%. And not only that you decarbonized power system nearly completely, you also decarbonize heating system and you decarbonize the transport system. So you killed 3 flies with the same tool. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I ask the next speaker, Professor Zdravko Kravania.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks the organizer and thanks Jiri for the invitation. I will speak from the system engineering viewpoint, and I would like to stress the necessity of considering the right sustainability measurement while we are optimizing our systems. Now, why is this so important? Here we can see this blue map, which was published by International Energy Agency some years ago. And if no measures are taken, then the global emission is going to be here where we have this baseline emission with the critical consequences of rising the temperature between 3 and 5 degrees. However, if those scale technology for reducing greenhouse gases are applied, then we are still at 1 to 2 degrees of Celsius, which is not that risky. Now, let us see where we are right now. So those graphs shows us emission trends in last 15 years. So what we can see is that those developed countries are already decreasing emissions, while undeveloped countries are still increasing them very much. So we are somewhere in between. So this is the projection of CO2 emissions in next couple of years. So what we can say is that this is still a very dangerous situation. So we have to do some more efficient and faster reduction of CO2 and other greenhouse gases emission. Now, we can do it by simultaneous approach using sustainable system synthesis. The basic governing principle is that we should not tackle elements of the system independently, but they have to be select and adjust in order to maximize the system overall performance, in our case, sustainability. How? By exploring to the maximal extent inherent interaction and external interaction, even by widening system borders. So we are talking now about simultaneous overall system approach, cross-sectorial mass and energy integration, sectorial like industry, energy production sector, residential, transport, and so on. And then also applying a principle of circular economy. Now suppose that we handle system-wide supply networks like even at the continental scale. So it is obvious that many, many green alternatives can be embedded in that systems with unlimited number of interactions that can be exploited. So rather than obtaining optimal trade-off solution, we then obtain a win-win solution that way. Now, when we do that, we have to have measurements to measure sustainability. And there are many, many indicators, and that's the problem. At least 140 of them exist, and there were more than 500 efforts to develop quantitative indexes and so on. Most of them are environmental indicators, like resource usage indicator, meat endpoint indicators, several environmental footprints. We have also aggregated measures and eco-cost indicators. There are much less social indicators. They are mainly related to unemployment, wealth gap, to work, environmental ethics, and welfare. And only we have few indicators that integrate all three aspects, economic, environmental, and social. So this is the least. Probably there exists some more, but we found so far only those. Those indicators also differ from the viewpoint of concept. We have concept based on damage assessment, prevention-based approach, or prevention cost benefits approach. This one is especially interesting because besides burdening of environment, we consider also unburdening of the environment at the same time. Selecting and using the appropriate measurement is very important because otherwise the consequences are poor or even a wrong solution and decision. So we have to think about developing and using more advanced concept and measurements, those that besides burdening also consider unburdening of the environment, that social dimension is also considered. Then, if possible, those different dimensions should be expressed by terms of equal unit, even monetary based, in order to obtain optimal trade-off solution. And not to forget, there are also some circularity indicators that should also be considered in order to reduce the consumption of resources. Now, when we talk about different effects on the environment, so besides burdening effects, we also have unburdening effects. In order to reduce or avoid burdening effects, one has to invest to zero waste. On annual basis, we call that eco-cost. However, we can also prevent burdening of the environment, for example, by utilizing waste rather than deposit it. So we gain some eco-benefit. Eco-benefit minus eco-cost gives us eco-profit. Now, eco-profit together with economic profit and social profit, especially profit gained by some new job created, gives us so-called sustainability profit. It could be also sustainability net present value. So now we have this composite objective. We can maximize sustainability profit or sustainability net present value subject to different constraints over different levels of supply chain, across different supply chain. And by that, we can obtain much better and sustainable solutions. So as to conclude, according to our experience, significant resource and emission reduction can be achieved by applying composite sustainability objectives like the sustainability profit, because optimal trade-offs between economic efficiency, preventing burdening of environment, and creating new job position can be obtained. And we can use that while performing integrated simultaneous approach across the system-wide supply network, while do the cross-sectorial mass and energy integration, and while applying other principles of circular economy. Thank you very much.
Very much appreciated circulated economy, and may I ask the next speaker.
I suppose I'm an engineer, but I'm a civil engineer. I work in a mechanical and aerospace school, and I do my research in power systems. So I'm a bit of a sort of a lost fish, for want of a better word, you know, swimming in the stream, listening to all these people talking about their materials, composite materials, chemical processes, biodigesters, inverters, converters, you name it, technology. And, you know, we're all off in our little boxes working on our bits of technology. But I suppose at the heart of the technology is the need for humankind to actually just continuously buy stuff, okay? And that in itself is a process. It's a process in the brain. And it is a chemical process, okay? If you think about it, we're driven to buy stuff constantly. So the minimization of resources, intake and emissions in the area of instantaneous gratification, okay? So I'm going to give you a sort of a little talk about my experience of dealing with younger people, older people, my own take, different people from all over the world and different backgrounds. I'm actually wearing green today. I'm from the United Kingdom, but I'm actually an Irish person from Cork in the Republic of Ireland. And there was a very famous man from where I'm from, and his name was Henry Ford. And Henry Ford, tomorrow, he would have done this in, I think, 20-something, over in Detroit. He reduced the time it took to make a car from 12 hours to 93 minutes on his manufacturing production line. He also did a very clever thing. Him with another few companies in the US, they introduced the 5-day, 40-hour working week. So the people who worked in his factory went out the door and they bought his car to go somewhere at the weekend to enjoy their life. And I think that that's what's happened over time. There's more people on the planet. Everybody wants to have, I don't like calling it a Western lifestyle because it's not. You know, Japan is very Japanese. Whether it's Western or not, that's where technology comes from. You know, I find it all really interesting. So I suppose what I call it is the push and pull factor. The ever-increasing demand for the basic necessities of life is what we all strove for before. Fresh water, clean food, breathable air, safe place to live. So now when you go on your media, your LinkedIn and your Facebook and your Instagram and your Twitter and all these sort of things. Periscope was a new one to me the other night. You know, people want modern technology and lifestyles. A friend of mine was working on a project in Africa recently, and he told me that they were all charging their mobile phones. So they weren't really concerned about fresh water, but they wanted to be hooked up to the mobile phone network. Okay? You know, it's Wi-Fi. It's about how fast your Wi-Fi is. how fast your car is, your beauty products. I put a picture of a man up here to show that actually both men and women are vain. Okay, so this advertising here for Botox, which is in essence like a chemical plastic filler, is for a man. So when we talk about environmental protection and we think about water, you know, it was in the news the other week, some researchers in the States have shown that actually this plastic now has infiltrated the whole of the water system. Fake tans, people are now going to extreme, they're injecting themselves with chemicals to make them look darker, okay, in the Western world when you're fair-skinned. And it's by young and old alike, we're all sort of being brainwashed in this mantra, you know. I also find it really interesting and fascinating that, you know, we have all this modern technology in terms of the internet and we're all hooked up all the time. And the likes of the Google and all these companies and Facebook, what do they really sell us or produce for us or save us in terms of energy and processes? Okay, so they'll maybe have a wind farm to supply their data center, but what are we saving in the data center? If I pop my clogs tomorrow morning, nobody's interested in my photographs saved in their data center. It uses a lot of energy. So the gratification, we live in a sort of more and more, it's becoming more disposable. And I actually feel sorry for young people coming up behind me. So I look at the older generation, 60s, 65, people who are retiring, and then there's the 70-year-olds, the 75-year-olds, and everybody who works in academia and in the private sector know these people, former retired civil servants. They never want to give up a job. They're constantly hovering around. Okay? And young people then are expected to work on sort of poorer contracts. The gig generation. So you can't afford to buy a house. You can't afford to buy a car. They want you to buy more iPhones. They want you to work longer hours. They want you to work more irregular hours. But it's all really unusual. So these are the things that are happening and competing for us to protect the climate, protect the world. We have finite resources. That's what I think is interesting. So all these processes, whether they're chemical, physical, biological, different energy sources in and out, you know, at the end of the day, you know, I was sitting on the train, I heard somebody complaining about the fact that they couldn't drive their car closer to their job, to their office. When I drop my children to school, I can hear some of the mothers complaining, you know, if they had their way, they'd drive the SUV right in the window of the school. I used to walk to school, 30 minutes, back and forth. When I went to university, I had a bicycle. Now all the students have cars. They all complain about parking their cars. 22, 21 years of age, and they have credit card debts to buy a car. Isn't that very sad? So balance. I think actually what we need is a bit of balance. I think if we sort of stop for a second and reassess where we're going and what we're doing on the planet, I think we can actually solve some of the problems. I love technology. I'm an engineer. But engineers don't seem to want to take responsibility for the technology they produce. We're great at researching it, saying how much emissions it produces, how much energy it needs, how we can save by selling you more technology. So if you see the little guys up there, you know, is this really happening? The government, they're standing there, we are destroying, and there's the poor scientist. So the commitment in the instantaneous, millisecond, knee-jerk reaction and responses of social and mainstream media is a genuine commitment to the whole missing. So this is what this young lady, that's in her brain. She finally got her debit card. And that actually is not from, you know, from a Western country. Okay? So roadmaps. So despite the best attempt of our politicians, so we have Kyoto, we've Paris now, you know, we just seem to be spiralling into this sort of abyss of just buying more stuff. My husband said to me the other day, he said, Aoife, you know, you can get a new Apple. I looked at him and I said, it's working fine. He said, but your contract is out of date, you can get a new Apple. And I'm like, well, what am I going to do with another new Apple? I have about 5 of them in the box, you know, the predecessors. You know, I can't press my fingers any faster to send a text message, you know. It's only going to go so fast. So it's all about risk management and how are we going to manage ourselves. So in terms of an integrated system and talking about the technology that Nevin, he mentioned, I agree with a lot of what he's saying, but I think we have to be sensible about it. So in terms of fossil fuels that are available to us on the planet, we're going to be using them for a long time. So we're going to need other technologies to actually clean up the mess as we go along. So carbon capture and storage. We need to look at that more in detail as well, okay? Green is great, but green has to be realistic. But also the existing technologies, we need to sort of look at those business cases again in a different way. A more integrated approach. So that's basically it. That's my talk. Thank you.
Some human touch to our technology discussion, and I will ask Heike Wolmsley.
Yeah, that one, that's it, yeah. Okay, it's good to be here. That was quite a contrast, looking at the social side versus the technology side. I feel the most guilty because I've used the biggest footprint to get here. New Zealand is basically ends up being about a 30-odd hour trip with a few stops off at the airport. And, so it's quite significant. New Zealand does have a good balance of lifestyle. The goal of every New Zealander is to retire and live at the beach. And if you get there when you're 30, you're there with a big smile on your face. Sometimes that counts against New Zealand because the best and brightest are trying to get to the beach when they're 30, 35. And the Americans sort of have the different philosophy where they're trying to work till they're 85. So we don't really have the problem that you're talking about. In some ways, we'd like the New Zealanders to be a bit more ambitious outside the rugby field. So here is one of the dams in New Zealand. We have lots of hydro dams, and as a result of that, we have an opportunity for quite an extensive renewable energy system with the hydro as the backbone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about energy ratios. It'll be technical, but I'll also mix it up with a bit of social stuff as well. Okay, let me see if I can get this. Okay, this is really just provides the motive for what we're doing. We all know there's a big global energy challenge. We're trying to convert or use something other than fossil fuel, and we're going to have lots of renewables to do that. We know that there's also going to be a couple of scenarios that can come into play depending on how successful we are in transitioning over to renewables. This is what we've all committed to there, sort of with the Paris Agreement, but what's really needed is the blue line. New Zealand is fairly confident that we can contribute to the blue line plan, provided we can get the cows, which contribute about 50% of our emissions, to eat the right sort of grass so they don't produce so much methane. However, in order to follow the blue line, I just want to introduce you to the political reality. In New Zealand, we have very good-looking politicians. This is the latest leader of the Labour Party. She's only 37. My nephew married her sister, so I know her well. But when she came onto the scene, she only arrived 6 weeks before the general election. And she said that climate change is the most important issue that the world faces. And she says, as a young 37-year-old, it's going to affect our generation. Well, the bad news is she got 36% of the national vote. And that was her message. We need to do something about climate change. If we combine her with the Greens, she's at 42%, not enough to govern. This is the existing party. They've been in for 9 years. When it came time for the election, they started talking about climate change for a little while. They said we need to do something. We've signed up for the Paris Accord. We need to develop a plan, they said. They've been in power for 9 years. And their idea was we need to develop a plan. But we need to grow the economy as well and have more jobs. It's important that we don't have extra costs on business. We don't want businesses shutting down in New Zealand and going somewhere else. That's not as good. They won 46% of the vote. There's another coalition partner that's deciding who they're going to go with. Why do I share this with you? Well, we can have all the technical ideas we want, but if we can't bring the people with us, if we can't articulate good arguments for the politicians to mimic, then the plans will not go forward in the way that we might hope. Here's another challenge. The question of fake news. Where is truth? Is it found in the Journal of Energy? Is it found in the Journal of Clean Technology? Well, the editors like to think so. But do the rest of the people think so? There's all sorts of information out there. What is truth? And that is a real challenge for democracies today, to figure out what voices we should listen to. You know, is there such a thing as a credible journalist anymore? Or has the blogger taken over? Now, just a few, or last year actually, one of my colleagues was invited to write an article. This is not so much a highly technical journal, it's more of a communication out to a lot of the chemical engineering fraternity of the world. So he wrote, actually, sorry, I'm on a different page. Let me just, okay, this one here, sorry. A few years ago, we had the Minister of the Environment come and visit our energy research group. Her assistant came with her, and we got talking to them about New Zealand's energy strategy. And we asked the assistant to the Minister of the Environment, says, who wrote the energy strategy? And this person says, I did. I'm very proud of what I did. And I said, well, what's your qualification? And they said, well, I have a major in communication. And I said, well, what do you know about energy? And she said, well, I don't need to know much about energy. I just need to know how to make a good brochure. And this had nice fancy pictures and diagrams, and there were all sorts of consultants that had contributed to it. But there were all manner of technical flaws in New Zealand's energy strategy that had been prepared by a communication graduate with not a lot of involvement from engineers. Another challenge for us. Okay, this was the one I wanted to talk about. This was an article that was written by one of my colleagues last year. It was about how New Zealand is going green with regards to renewable energy. It was just a general article, it wasn't overly technical. It ended up winning the Global Best Paper Award for this magazine. And what it actually taught us is that there are a lot of people out there that are looking for sort of semi-technical articles. You know, we need to write some articles that can be in the major newspapers, that can be in the Time magazine, that can be in Newsweek, and some of these general magazines and resources that the general public are reading. But what we have to do that is we've got to take the concepts and present them graphically in a way that the average person can understand. I think that's going to be important. It's a contribution that we can make. Now, this brings us to the concept of energy ratios, because I think these concepts can be understood by the general public, even though they don't have any training in thermodynamics. So these are three simple ratios. If you want to learn more about them, there's a fantastic talk on tomorrow morning by one of my co-authors at 9 o'clock. So I'd just like to talk to you about this idea of energy return on energy investment. We all know about investments. We know that you've got to spend money to make money. Well, you've got to spend energy in order to make energy. So this is shown here as the energy return on energy investment. So what this is that when we make something, we start off with construction, and then we have to put a little bit more in terms of extraction. We have to run the plant, and then as we get the plant running during the operating life, we're able to produce some outputs, and then we have to decommission the plant. And so at the end, we can do a life cycle assessment, and we can work out that there's a certain amount of energy we're able to get from the expended energy that we've invested. So that ratio is really important. It's known as the energy return on investment. And it makes sense that if we get a lot of energy back for a small amount of investment, then it's likely that the cost of that energy is going to be a little cheaper. So taking that idea a little further, here is the energy ratios being applied to a renewable system. So here we have, starting with a renewable energy source at sea, we take it into a generation device that's had some energy B in order to create it, to create the steel, to create the concrete, and then we produce the electricity. We then transmit it to society. So if we wanted to get the investment ratio, it would simply be A upon B. We can also take other ratios. Here's another one. Oops. This one's known as the energy payback time. We can look at how much energy we've created. We can take our energy over the lifetime of the device or the technology, divide it by the life of it, and we can then work out how many years it takes to pay back what we've invested in the first place. And we can also use another one here, known as the resource utilization factor, where we take the beginning resource C, the resource B, and we divide that into the total output. Now, similar analysis can be done with fossil fuels, and we can take, for example, the energy ratio of the fuel itself, and we can sort of take the A and the A1 and the B1, and we can work out an energy return for the fossil fuel. We can also take an overall balance of generation where we're taking the fuel, we're then applying it into the generation. Oops. What's happening here? Okay. There it is. And then we can end up generating the energy return for the fossil fuel, which is a combination of the two. Now, what's interesting about this is as fossil fuels get harder to find, the EROI of the fuel goes up and it becomes more expensive. You have to drill deeper wells, you have to go deeper into the ground to get more coal, and so on. So the energy return on investment of fossil fuel driven systems is getting worse over time. Also, the energy payback is similar to what we had before, and likewise the resource utilization factor. Now, when we consider the energy return on investment for different systems, what you notice is that the renewables are spread over quite a wide range. So what this means is, if you try to optimize the system, it's very country specific. You can't just assume that your hydro is as good as some other country. You can't assume that your solar is going to be good or your wind is going to be good. The optimization that you have to do is very specific to every country, to every region. And so that's good news for us as engineers. There's work to be done, but there's also truth to be conveyed. Because if you only hear of the bad situations, your general public may think that that's your situation, and it may not be. So the engineers need to play a role in conveying the truth of the situation for your country. Likewise, when it comes to the technology, this is showing how when new technology is first produced, it can be very expensive. As we come up with clever ways to make it, the energy to do that gets less, the energy return gets better. And so things like solar, the cost of solar has come down tremendously, partly due to mass production and the reduction in the energy invested to produce it. But likewise, if we start getting materials becoming depleted, rare earths and other things, that may create some challenges for the technology. So just to recap, another big challenge for renewables that we have to keep thinking of that's related to this energy ratio is the time value of energy. With renewables, we have to invest a lot of the energy at the front end and hope that they last for the 30 years that the salesman that sold us the solar said it was going to last. If it only lasts for 10 years, then it's going to be a lot worse off. We'll be a lot worse off. The other thing that's going to happen as a result of all this energy having to be invested at the front end is there's going to be a lot more emissions that the world is going to be confronted with as a result of all of that investment in the renewables. And so there's another question that we've been looking at. There's a paper that I'll be presenting on Sunday that's going to answer the question of how does energy return on investment relate to emissions. And so we developed some equations and we actually calculate what the emissions peak will be for a given profile of renewables. And where we live in a country that imports those emissions, they become virtual emissions. Now, one of the graphs that was shown, it showed that America's emissions is going down. It showed that Europe's emissions is going down, and it showed China going up. Guess why China's is going up? It's because they're making the equipment that's enabling America's to go down, enabling Europe to go down. So globally, we have to think about where the virtual emissions are. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Political and economical touch to the discussion, and now Evan will deal a little bit with the transport, huge transport ships.
Yeah, is it this? Thank you, Prof. Lee. It is my great pleasure to involve in this panel discussions. I don't have a strong engineering background. My bachelor degree is in industrial chemistry and Master of Philosophy with the research area of waste treatment and management. I'm not a well-qualified person to involve in this panel discussion, but I hope the topic that I'm going to present able to provide some insight and receive some feedback and comments. The topic that I'm going to present is towards sustainable sea transportation. Transportation is one of the largest GHG contributor. It contributes 26% of the total GHG emissions in US and 23.2% in EU and in Europe. It also responsible for other negative externality, such as the impact on air quality, which affecting the human health, and also affecting the crop yields. This figure shows the emission, the carbon monoxide, the non-methane volatile organic compound, nitrogen oxide, sulfur oxide, and particulate matter from transport and non-transport sector. The transport sector, the non-yellow color, is significant even compared with compared to the big sector. By comparing to the CO2 emissions, the concern on the pollutant in optimization study is relatively less established. In addition, the LCA study at the distribution stage, global warming potential is usually considered compared to the photochemical ozone creation potentials. The research attentions of transportations is mainly focused on the land transportations. However, more than 80% of the world trade is carried out by shipping. It is likely to continue increase due to the increase of global scale trade. This presented picture is the conditions of the ship traffic. Shipping contribute most of the particulate matter and also the sulfur oxide of transportation, as shown in these figures. By comparing the carbon dioxide emission factors of truck and ship, the effect of the ship is insignificant. However, this is not the case for the other pollutants, especially the sulfur oxide and also the particulate matter. And moreover, the distance traveled by ship and also by truck is different. For example, from Rotterdam to Genoa, the difference of the distance is almost triple. And this figure shows the top 10 polluted port. The impact of the high concentration at the place should not be ignored, although it is not a global issue like GHG emissions. So how to identify the optimized freight transport mode choice? The method and measurements of each emissions is well established. However, the assessment approach, the framework, the methodology needs more development. So to sum up, 5 issues should be considered towards a better assessment for sustainable sea transportations. First, in optimization study, environmental sustainable solution is always referred to low GHG emissions or only the low carbon dioxide emissions. The air pollutant is not always be considered in the optimization study. Second, the distribution stage, the shipping, is not commonly included in the LCS study. And also, the emissions factor of CO2 is much lower, but this is not the case for the other harmful pollutants. And also, by ship, it will need a longer distance, and however, ship has a larger capacity. Fourth, the impact of the high concentration at the place, and also the impact of other activities, such as the ship scrapping, container loading and unloading. So, once again, I would like to highlight that air emission impact in optimization study should consider both GHG and also the air pollutant in an overall system. This is especially for the study of transportation mode and biomass energy. planning. A methodology with defined criteria boundary, the understandings of interactions or relationship between the GHG and air pollutants need to be developed. This can minimize the potential of the footprint shifting and also support the more appropriate decision makings. Yeah, thank you.
We can start the discussion. The first for the discussion is Pekka. You prepared a few slides. Don't worry, it will not be lecture. It will be something to be considered and probably something to be followed.
Found it. Good. Good evening from me. Now that all the problems have been outlined, this is one example which in our recent visit to China we have been very impressed, actually a couple of visits. And this is one example how things are done right. Bike sharing. This is our team at the Spill Laboratory. This is the photo from the kickoff meeting and the project. And we are very grateful for the funding to the program. First, to outline within the context of increasing emissions, we have a serious share of transportation, and this links to the previous presentation by Jevan. So what can be done about transportation, especially in the cities? A lot. Now, this is what we could photograph at the National Tea Museum in Hangzhou. You will notice there are no strange devices around the bicycles, they just parked. Okay. This is very important to understand. Bikes everywhere. These are shared bikes. They are very well used, very happily, including our hosts go from office to home on these shared bikes, and it's very easy to do. This is China. Now, here I took the liberty to research a little bit what happens in the world. One can see, oh, great, shared bikes everywhere. However, this is a little bit misleading. Yes, these are all locations all over the world which offer shared bikes for some time. But look, this says here it's Barcelona. These are all locked to some station that's called docked system. But despite this picture, the other day when it was the general strike in Barcelona, we couldn't see any shared bike to be used actually. So I don't think this is very useful or helpful. This is in Belgium. Same, docked. Now, a little bit about impacts. Sharing the bikes has a few positive impacts. One of the groups is social impact, increased connectivity. People get more exercise and lower income transportation. The environmental impact improvement, or as Zdravko pointed, it's the unburdening effect, is not negligible. Overall, the potential benefits are reduced emissions, improved health, improved convenience, so people take it and use it. But how? Although elsewhere, bike sharing has been for some time around, the problem is that it's not very convenient or easy to use. What's the practice now in China? People can take the bikes from anywhere, leave them anywhere they like. So this is very flexible. It's very simple to use. It's dockless. There is just a lock on the back wheel. These are smart locks. They have solar panels to power the locks, real-time position tracking. It's very simple to use. There are mobile applications for each company. They don't charge too much, and despite of that, they make reasonable money to operate. Very easy to pay. They just click with WeChat, and that's it. Scan the QR code, and it's paid. It's low, very low cost for the company itself. They found a very good way to manufacture and get the bikes. So all these factors make the use and the supply of the service quite pervasive and useful. So I would like to finish with the question, what would be the future? You can visit this website if you like. It's about shared cars. This is one of the options. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you've got plenty of presentations, and now is the time for the discussion. I will ask the panelists to come, to be ready to face the questions. And who is, even when we are a little bit late, but we still got 25 minutes, and I hope we will have a number of questions, suggestions. Yeah, sure.
Okay, I would like to start the discussion, if you allow me. I would like to start with what Mike Walmsley presented about the energy ratios. And for me, it's a key question. How do we compare fossil fuels with renewables? Are these ratios sufficient, or we need to invent other ones?
Hello. Me and my co-authors are still arguing about that. I actually think when you take the time value of energy into play, I think it's actually not bad. I think it's quite a good comparison between the renewable and the non-renewable. If you don't take the time value of energy in, then it does make the renewables look better than what they are.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Peter's
Yeah, please use mic. Yeah.
Peter, how much was the price of the bike, Peter? The bike? Yeah. In China. Was it $45 US, was it?
No, that's the price of the bike.
To manufacture, yeah. How much was it?
And the ride was something like...
No, not the ride, to manufacture. $45. Yes. But you see, it's all relative. But it's all relative, because in China at the moment, it's very cheap for somebody to work in a factory making a bike for $45. And we're going back, we're actually doing the same thing that happened with Henry Ford in America, and that's why I said it, in 1920 odd. Okay? The cost of living as people get more and more job opportunities in a country escalates. So where are we going to send manufacturing to next? The North Pole. You know, so this is the point. Ratios are great, but ratios are only a measure of what's happening at an instant in time. You can predict into the future, but you don't know what's going to happen. But we keep on doing the same things over and over again. So now when you go to China, I was in Beijing there last year, I saw loads of couples working, and I saw very few children. And I asked them where their children were. And they told me that they were with their grandparents because they were working so hard because they had to earn the money to pay for the things that they needed. So I asked them, what do they need? This was a young lady, she was about the same age as me. And she says, well, I have to pay for the apartment, okay, and I have to pay for my children's university education. And I have to save up for different things. And she was explaining. And as she was going through things, I thought to myself, she's now falling into the trap that we did and we've done in the West. Do you understand? So that's why I'm just...
Yeah, okay. You know, we use this shared bikes as an example. What was really appalling in Shanghai, we've seen very, very few private bikes because those bikes are blue, green, red, yellow, and normal bikes are like the bikes. And I think more than 95% of bikes suddenly are shared bikes, which is something stunning. Because in Brno we've got also those shared bikes, but this is this European, you know, something heavy. You've got a big investment, you have to take it from a fixed place, you have to deliver it to the fixed place. This is for me an excellent example of a smart city, using mobile applications. Now I've got a question for Neven. Do you think that something like this might happen with cars in some foreseeable future?
Yes, but I would just like to...
yeah, but you can say what you want and after.
To mention what I have seen also in Xi'an, in the old city, and in Beijing also with the shared bikes. Sometimes they pile them in hutongs vertically, not like that, but like that. I didn't understand why, but I think it's because they don't want that somebody else takes them before the morning so they can use them in the morning. So there is some problem with undocked bikes which have to be solved, but with big data that can be solved. But I would like now to follow your car issue. I think that that is going to happen because the cars are soon going to be driving themselves. So why would you want to have hassle of owning a car if you can just Uber it or lift it to come and pick you up and take you somewhere? And this is going to create a very different business model because, first of all, we will need only 1/4 of cars because in rush hour, only 1/4 of cars are actually on the road. Electric cars don't need any servicing or very little servicing. They need 4 times less energy. So we are creating a completely new world. I think in 10 years' time, we are going to be seeing that happening. And Chinese are definitely in a frontier. If you look at the first 6 months of the sales of electric cars in China, it's 2.6% of the total car market in China is already electric. So China is the next revolutionary country on the technological front. So I like that you started with bikes, but I think it's going to go into e-transport.
Okay, thank you. Petar?
I would like a little bit to respond here. It's a nice vision, and technologically I don't see any problem. But I see a problem in terms of economics or market. The danger is if somebody monopolizes this service, then who knows how it will be dispensed. It's good to have more than one supplier, better 3 or 4, like currently in China, but I'm not sure, maybe they have also the same owner. So monopoly is a real danger.
I agree.
Yeah, and I've got something which been mentioned here. Do you think that the population would accept suddenly the social status, which in many countries is a big car, you know, I've got better car than you. Do you think that the population would accept it? With bikes, it's quite easy, you know, because even, you know, I don't know what bike is not as much a social status.
It's already happening. If you're looking at statistics, young people don't have cars anymore. This is a 20th century myth. Young people buy cars now when they get a baby, because they need it. But without a baby, why should they need a car? You know, status symbols for our generation is a car, but for young people it's not.
Well, it would be very encouraging, and I would be very, very happy with this. But yes,
a number of the main auto manufacturers now are rebranding themselves energy companies. And it's going to be an interesting situation, because what you have is you have electricity companies who, by and large, even though they're liberalised, are vertically liberalised, you know. They're all tenuously linked to each other, are strongly linked to each other in some locations. So what would happen there, and how this happens, and who owns the infrastructure, because there's a massive petrochemical infrastructure in place already to feed transport. So in terms of, you know, charging infrastructure, who's going to own that, the monopoly situation. Young people, Nevin has correctly pointed out, you know, they don't own cars by and large, and in urban areas they can't afford to park them. So they just hire them for an hour or two or a half an hour, and they'll drive it. So, you know, it's the way young people live now, everything is different for them. So the way that we live now, I'm on the sort of tail end of the dinosaur era from the last century, you know.
okay, yes, please.
So I have a question to Ms. Foley. Since you touched the human aspects in our discussion, and most of the speakers spoke about the proactive measures that are required to control the pollution, because that is the prime focus of this discussion, I feel. How would you integrate these two aspects? One is like we need to reduce our requirement, and then the proactive approaches that are required for the control of pollution. So how would you take it to the ground level? Because this is important. The first aspect is very important. Industries can always adopt the best practices to minimize the pollution, but at the same time we need to have the human touch to the society where they can control their grid.
I actually think, you know, we're doing all the number crunching, but we're forgetting the whole human aspect of it. You know, if we look at technology, it's great, we all love it. When I saw your poster today, and it was about recycling tyres and the life cycle analysis of tyres, you know, in Ireland we have a similar problem. In the UK there's a similar problem. We've shredded tyres, we've looked at pyrolysis of tyres, we've looked at all different, we're all doing the same thing in a different way in different countries. But the big thing is, you know, you pointed on it, the false truth, the bloggers. You know, do we need to be buying, you know, an extra moisturiser? That's what's causing the pollution. Companies are going to make profit anyway, because there's more of us living on the planet, because we're all living longer. People are living longer around the world. The population is increasing. So it's the resource is going to be used just in a different way. But is that sustainable? That's the key. And how can we manage the pollution? And I think the management of the pollution, like the catalytic converter long ago for the car, we're going to have to invest more and more in that, in power stations, in manufacturing and heat, in the chemicals that go into the chemical processes that are used to make medicines, cleaning products. They are all the sources that are sort of tipping away in the background all the time. I think that's what's needs to be looked at. You know, we're focusing on energy, we're focusing on transport, we're focusing on electricity, but it's what we make as well, and all the materials that go into them from around the world. Is that sustainable? It's fine for me here, but it's different for somebody in India. You know, when you hear boats, you mentioned boat scrapping. Boats go to India to be scrapped. They're driven up onto the beach, and people climb all over them like ants and they strip them down. Is that sustainable? Is that a nice way for anybody to live? That's not. There are social issues all over the world. There's a huge environmental pollution associated with these, you know, and the more we reach, you know, it's 400 cars per capita, 1,000 people, 600 cars, 700, 800 cars in the States per 1,000 head of population. India and China are going to go the same way with car ownership. So whether it's, you know, an internal combustion engine or a battery vehicle, the material that goes in to make the lithium iron has to come from a mine in South America. So there's issues there that we need to sort of think about. So it's not a carbon taxation. I think it's where the material is coming from first day, and the benefit should go to those countries.
Okay.
I have one more question, sir, with your permission.
Okay, you've got several.
Avenger. Sir, you mentioned about the heat and mass integration.
Just please.
Heat integration, we are, I think, probably it's been successful in most of the industries wherever it is implemented. What about mass integration? Is it commercialized, or what is your views on that? Because it's a very important aspect in process industry particularly, like chemical industries. So, mass integration,
Right now, we are not talking much about mass integration, but I think there is a scope for that. Cycling economy is behind that. When we talk about mass integration, we usually talk about mass heat exchanger networks used for reduction of pollutants so far, but not so much at the stage of chemical reactions. There was some work done like 15 years ago in US at the state of chemical reactions. And we should look at it. I think it is a promising area.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've got one question. I wonder if Neven or somebody can answer. If I want to go, say, to city of Hamburg with the car, I must have E5 and you know, special ecological sticker. If a big ship, which is about 30 times more polluting, is entering Hamburg, nothing happens. What is the reason?
Well, the reason is, I would say, quite obvious. Ships are not passing through streets. They're polluting with particles in unpopulated seas. So that's why we didn't see them as a first priority to solve. Because what you have shown so well, ships are much better on CO2, so that's good. They're terrible on SOx, NOx, and particles, but they're generally sailing in open seas. And we have diesel cars in city centers which are actually polluting 10 times more than big trucks per liter of fuel because the car industry is cheating with the emission standards. So this is the critical problem. Diesel cars should be forbidden, not the trucks. Trucks are much cleaner than diesel cars. Okay, the ships is the next big thing. EU is dedicated quite a lot of funding in the future program in order to try to think about cleaning ships. It makes sense, of course, because those ships, when they're approaching ports, they do pollute. But I think it was rational to keep them out up to now.
Well, when I see those slides, I am not so sure. And probably if you make analysis of not CO2, you know, about haze and smoke in front of the Rathaus in Hamburg, and if you've got emissions somehow marked by a red or blue, I am not sure which would be.
Haze is coming from either small boilers, this is a typical problem in Southeast Europe, biomass burning boilers, and from diesel cars, not from ships on the oceans.
No, no, no. In this I don't agree, and we can discuss it, because it's no regulation. You know, you are talking about diesel, but what is burned by ships, it's much worse than diesel.
I know, but it doesn't matter because the particle matter, which produces haze, doesn't travel 100 kilometers. If you look, for example, Chinese situation now in the cities, they're finally cleaning up small furnaces from city centers, and the pollution is falling rapidly. It's not the big coal power plants that produce the biggest amount of emission that are a problem in city centers. Yeah. It's the small furnaces that produce the most of haze.
China did what London did in 1952, prohibited coal and switched to gas. But you know, I'm not advocating that ships are worse, but ships are contributing a lot. And the problem is, as you said, it should come, but I haven't seen too many. It's still burning, and it's still part of engineering, and I haven't seen too many papers dealing with those issues and raising awareness. And I think we should consider it as well. and generally, CO2 is bad, or greenhouse gases are very bad, but what makes life miserable in big cities is haze and smoke. It comes, you know, Chinese cities, if you go to LA, it's similar. Even in our small European cities, if it's January, February inversion, it's very bad. And I think more attention should be directed to this one. Okay, well, we are coming nearly to the end. Anybody else who would like to make the last word? Yes, please.
I just wanted, not to make a question really, but just to thank the panel, because I like very much, because you put technical things, we are all technical people, but also human things. And I think that the scientific community has a huge responsibility, because the truth is that people, most of the people of the world, does not care at all. I mean, they care how they will get their money for buying the things, or for, and we have the responsibility to tell the truth and to be able to communicate it. It was great this morning talk discussing about the different way of storytelling and the different effect, because otherwise there is people saying lies and other people believing. So we have the responsibility to make this happen. I personally do not believe that we will be able to make it. As it was, if you look at the two curves, it's very difficult that we will be able to follow the bottom line. So we also need to be able to understand, to think at a B plan to manage the future. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Have somebody from the panel have to last word?
I actually want to ask this gentleman.
Okay,
Vincenzo? Yeah, when you were talking about, you know, extreme weather events, talking about statistics and Gaussian, I suppose whether there's extreme weather events or not, there's just one thing I think that's very important. Weather patterns are changing. Whether they're extreme or not is really not the point. Because what's going to happen is how people live and adapt around the world, and you mentioned smart cities. When there's more people living in urban areas where it gets warmer for longer periods of time, puts them physically under more pressure. So whether it's an extreme event, it's amplified in an urban area. So you're talking reaching up into the 40s more often for longer periods of time. In terms of the ships, and I know where you're coming from, Jerry, and I know where you're coming from as well, Nevin, if you think about it, what those particulate matters and NOx and SOx are doing is they're going into the ocean water chain and they're affecting the biological life of shellfish, fish, sediment on the floor. It's something that we don't understand. If you look at emissions and you look at the temperature drop in the Russian Federation, in the Russian tundra, and the permafrost is melting, there's huge methane trapped there. That's something that's not even being looked at. So that's why I was saying to you, looking at all the technologies, but not looking at all the other biological and physical processes that are happening in the world and how they're going to change is going to be a major issue as well moving forward. So statistically, whether it's an extreme event or not, is sort of a moot point, whether you use Gaussian or whether it's 1, 2 or 3 tails or whatever way you want to look at it. We just don't know. As you said, it's a black swan, but we don't know the black swan. We can do the Manhattan Project and we can make a nuclear bomb as scientists and engineers. But this is something we can't do to kill loads of people in World War II.
There's no difficulty in examining extreme events probabilities. They are well-developed theories. I mean, you can use a wonderful Fréchet distribution, Weibull distributions. The problem is we don't have enough information to do that. As you say, we have a lot of uncertainty, and more or less our future, this is my personal belief, will be determined by black swans. And in a way that we cannot predict. We can use a no-regrets policy, and as I said, we can build on that. We can try to develop a metric and reach a consensus, nothing more than that, and so that we can have a front end towards society, towards policymakers, because otherwise every politician, I saw the President of the United States that denies global warming, but on the other side, there are politicians who deny the consequences of immigration, for instance. So that's, everybody picks the right cherry. So my conviction is that we should offer a united front based on consensus. That's it.
Okay, I'm afraid we should close down. I highly appreciate those who stayed with us even to this late night. You shown a big commitment, and a special thanks to all panel speakers. You delivered very interesting speeches. Thank you very much, and let's see what we can do together from different points of view, you know, from technology, societal, political, financial. This is a kind of a diamond with many different facets, and all of them should be somehow dealt with. Thank you very much.
Before you leave, I have an announcement to make. There is a continuation of program. Starting at 8:30, there is a networking event at the reception with free food and drinks. So please make some project proposals while drinking and eating. Thank you very much. Also, yes, all your lectures from today are on Twitter and Facebook. Find yourself, tag yourself, because we want to make an impact. Thank you.